Hello everyone. Before we get started, make sure to like and subscribe, and leave a comment saying where you're from and when you watched. That way, YouTube will continue to show you stories like this. Now, let's get started. Asterisk, I still remember the day we found the book. It was a hot afternoon. The sun was hidden by thick clouds. The air was heavy, as if a big storm was coming. We, for young people, eager and foolish, decided to explore the abandoned house at the end of the village, where it was rumored that a family had disappeared without a trace. In our minds, it was just a dramatic adventure, an opportunity to recount the paranormal stories we often heard online. None of us could have imagined that it would be the beginning of a nightmare that would haunt us for the rest of our lives. The house was dilapidated. The wooden door creaked when we pushed it open. Dust was flying everywhere. The smell of mold hit our noses. There were burn marks on the walls, as if a fierce fire had once engulfed this place. When we searched the room under the stairs, we found an old wooden chest with a rusty lock. With a loud bang, the lock broke. Inside, among the rotten cloth and meaningless objects, was a thick, heavy black book, engraved with strange characters. As soon as I touched it, I felt a chill run down my spine. We should have left it, let it sleep under the dust of time. But curiosity won out. One of us opened the book. Scribbled lines appeared, as if written in dried blood, describing rituals of spirit summoning, ways to connect with the other side. We laughed, saying that this must be someone's prank. But deep down, a seed of fear had sprouted the next day. We returned with candles, salt, and white chalk, all according to the instructions in the book. The prank became an official ritual. The abandoned house became a sinful experiment. At night, we sat in a circle, shaking our hands, writing symbols on the cold tile floor. Outside, the wind whistled through the cracks in the door like a howl. A strange feeling surrounded me, both excitement and terror. My best friend read the first verse of the spell aloud. His voice echoed, heavy, as if it no longer belonged to him. The candle flickered, the light stretching out distorted shadows on the walls. I began to feel suffocated. The air was thin, as if the room had sucked all the oxygen out. Suddenly, a sound rang out, like footsteps from upstairs, slow, drawn out. We looked at each other, faces pale. It was just my imagination, someone whispered. But in our eyes, the fear was clear. The whispering began to echo everywhere. I didn't know where it came from, the walls, the ceiling, or my own head. The voice was unclear, just fragments of words, but it carried a cold hatred. I covered my ears, but I heard it. Then the book turned the next page. The candles swayed as if it were about to go out. We never thought of stopping. Drawn in, urged by an invisible force, we continued. No one knew that, at that moment, the thin line between the living world and the darkness had been torn apart. A shadow flashed in the cracked mirror hanging in the corner of the room. A foul smell wafted up from somewhere, making me nauseous. I trembled and wrote everything down in this diary, not to keep, but to warn. If anyone reads it, please burn it before it's too late. But I knew everything had only just begun. That night was just a door that had just opened, and what awaited behind would be much more terrible. Continued in Volume 2 of Forbidden Texts. Hello everyone. Before we get started, make sure to like and subscribe, and leave a comment saying where you're from and when you watched. That way, YouTube will continue to show you stories like this. Now, let's get started. Asterisk, the second night. We returned to the house with the book. It was pouring rain, each drop beating on the rusted tin roof like a funeral drum. This time, there was no laughter, no carefree excitement of the day before. Instead, we were all haunted by what we had heard and seen, shadows passing by mirrors, heavy footsteps, and whispers that pierced our brains. But the more we feared, the more we were driven by sinful curiosity. When I opened the book, I realized something. The lines that had been blurred yesterday were now clearer. It was as if the book itself had come to life, gradually revealing to us what it wanted. On the yellowed pages, there was a new spell, accompanied by distorted drawings of people with elongated faces, grinning from ear to ear. Just below the pictures was a warning in shaky letters. Never read this aloud. Do not write it down. Whoever does it will no longer be himself. A deadly silence fell, but that silence did not last long. My friend named Kai, the most stubborn guy in the group, laughed coldly, thinking that this was just part of the book's effect to scare us. Before our weak objection, he took out his chalk and started to redraw those characters on the floor. The squiggly lines appeared, each time becoming strangely brighter, as if glowing from within the bricks. I tried to stop him, but at that moment, Kai had already started reading. His voice gradually changed, distorted, deep as if coming from a deep hole in the ground. The flashlight in my hand suddenly went out, leaving only the flickering candlelight. The four walls shook as if breathing. The air was so heavy that my lungs felt like they were being suffocated. Then it happened. The characters Kai had just written suddenly turned into a dark red liquid, blood. They spread out, writhing on the floor like snakes, forming sentences that I did not dare to read. I screamed, rushing to pull Kai out of the circle, but an invisible force held him back. Kai's eyes rolled back, the whites of his eyes covered, his mouth still muttering the incantation. The sound echoed throughout the house, no longer the sound of rain, no longer the sound of wind, but a terrifying chorus, the voices of men, women, children mixed together like ghosts singing a requiem. I trembled, feeling every hair on my body stand on end. Then Kai fell. The room fell silent. The words written in blood gradually disappeared, leaving the wet tile floor a strong, fishy smell. We hugged each other. No one dared to say a word. But the horror had not stopped. When I turned around, the book was opened to a new page, and on it clearly appeared the words in Vietnamese, as if written just for us. One has been chosen. One has been lost. The rest will witness. I quickly slammed the book shut, throwing it into the corner of the room. But as soon as the book hit the ground, the pages flew open, and the wind blew from somewhere, turning them. Handwritten lines in red ink appeared, sentence by sentence, word by word, as if someone invisible was writing them. I heard a whisper right behind my neck, "You will not escape." I turned around, only to see the darkness so thick that it swallowed the candlelight. In that moment, I swear, I saw a face leaning in close, pale with a cracked mouth, eyes as black as a pit. The group panicked and ran outside, but when I stepped through the door, I realized that the house was still there, but the surrounding scenery was different. It was not the drizzling rain, not the familiar village, but an endless void, as black as a pit. The house was as lonely as an island in the endless darkness. Kai disappeared. There were only 3 of us left, and the book was still there, waiting for us to continue reading. I know the worst is yet to begin. Continued in episode 3, Home Alone. Hello everyone. Before we get started, make sure to like and subscribe, and leave a comment saying where you're from and when you watched. That way, YouTube will continue to show you stories like this. Now, let's get started. Asterisk, after Kai disappeared, there were only 3 of us left, standing, trembling in the dark, abandoned house. No one dared to say a word, only the sound of our hearts pounding as if they were about to burst. The surrounding scenery changed. No more rain, no more familiar villagers, only a pitch-black void surrounding us, making the house seem isolated in the middle of an endless abyss. I remember that feeling very clearly, as if we were cut off from the real world, locked in a giant cage with no way out. We turned back. The book was still open, the pages were turning continuously without wind, and the whispering voice seemed to whisper right next to our ears. We ran away, but when we opened the main door, outside was still this same house, dark and suffocating. No matter which direction we ran, the stairs, the hallway, the living room were all repeated, as if the house had become a maze with no way out. Fear increased. We understood that we were trapped in a space that did not belong to humans. As I panicked, I heard my name being called. The voice was as gentle as my mother's, but my mother had died many years ago. I knew I shouldn't listen, but my feet seemed to walk on their own, leading me to a dark room. There was a broken mirror hanging crookedly on the wall. The mirror did not reflect the 3 of us, but only me, standing alone. The 2 friends behind me shouted, saying that my reflection in the mirror was smiling while I was not. A chill ran down my spine. I immediately closed my eyes and pulled them out. But the house did not give us peace. Footsteps echoed everywhere, the sound of doors opening and closing, as if someone was moving. Every time I turned my head, I saw a dark figure looming at the end of the hallway, just standing there watching us. Without having to get closer, it still made my skin freeze. We discussed splitting up to check, but quickly realized that we were stupid. If we were separated for a few seconds, a scream would ring out, and the other person would disappear in an instant. We were all in the same house now, but each of us was pulled into a separate, lonely space, like people home alone in the thick darkness. I tried to remember everything, hoping to find a way out, but every step took me back to the original room. The candle flickered, the darkness gradually swallowed the light, and my breath echoed as if I was not the only one breathing. In that moment, I realized the only door that was still open, the basement. From the basement, a musty, fishy smell rose up, along with a sound like claws scratching the brick wall. Even though we knew that opening it would be suicide, we had no other choice. I trembled and held the doorknob, and as soon as I turned it gently, the wooden door creaked open and thick darkness flooded in. From below, something had been waiting for us for a long time. Stay tuned for episode 4 of Rain Sounds Creepypasta. Hello everyone. Before we get started, make sure to like and subscribe, and leave a comment saying where you're from and when you watched. That way, YouTube will continue to show you stories like this. Now, let's get started. Asterisk, the cellar door opened, and a cold blast of air rushed in, making all 3 of us suffocate. It was pitch black below, deep and dark, and from there came a rustling sound like hundreds of fingernails scratching at the bricks and stones. We hesitated, but then we had to go down because the house above seemed to be squeezing us, forcing us to follow this only path. My steps were heavy, my heart was pounding, and each drop of cold sweat fell, mixing with the dripping sound that echoed in the darkness. When we reached the bottom of the stairs, a damp room appeared, the walls covered with green moss, the ceiling dripping continuously, creating a sound like the sound of falling rain. But it was not just water. Each drop that fell reeked of blood, sticking to our skin. The dripping sound rang out regularly, interspersed with strange whispers. At first it was vague, then it gradually became clear as disjointed sentences, like the voice of someone reciting a prayer for the dead. We hugged each other tightly, looking around the dark room, the small candle in our hands shaking not enough to illuminate the whole room. A whisper suddenly sounded right next to our ears, calling each person's name. I turned around in panic, but saw no one but my two friends. The dark shadow moved vaguely along the wall, like something crawling right inside the stone. Then suddenly, the whole cellar shook. The ground cracked into a gap. From under that gap came a terrible stench, accompanied by hot, humid breath blowing in my face. I heard a cackle, a childish laugh, but prolonged, distorted like broken metal. One of us couldn't stand it anymore, screamed loudly and rushed up the stairs. But after a few seconds, the scream stopped, leaving a heavy silence. The other person and I stood there, stunned. Now there were only two of us. The book upstairs was gone, but the whispers from the pages still seemed to echo in the cellar. I felt that this place was not a warehouse, but the heart of the ritual, where the boundary between life and death had been opened wide. The drops of blood rained down steadily. The hypnotic sound seemed to urge us to step deeper into the darkness. I trembled, writing more in this diary, hoping to keep the last bit of clarity, because I knew, beyond that darkness, there were more terrible things waiting. Stay tuned for episode 5 of Camping. Hello everyone. Before we get started, make sure to like and subscribe and leave a comment saying where you're from and when you watched. That way, YouTube will continue to show you stories like this. Now, let's get started. Asterisk, there were only two of us, trudging through the pitch-black cellar. But then, in a flash, I realized that the scenery around us had changed. There were no more damp stone walls, no more dripping blood rain, but a cold, sparse forest. The night sky was covered, the wind blew fiercely, rustling the leaves. I was stunned to realize that my remaining friend and I were standing in the middle of an empty field, where there was a half-burning fire, giving the feeling of a camping trip in the middle of the forest. But we had never been here before, nor did we bring a tent or firewood. The flickering flames cast shadows on the skinny tree trunks, stretching down to the ground like broken arms. In the distance, I heard giggling and children's voices echoing. In the middle of the forest night, we shivered, approaching the fire, and realized there was an old backpack next to us. Inside were not ordinary belongings, but identical items of the friends who had disappeared. Kai's small knife, Wang's notebook, the necklace I always wore. All were stained with dried blood. My friend burst into tears, and I could only hold the diary tightly to my chest as if clinging to the last bit of reality. Then from the deep forest, footsteps echoed, slow but sure. We immediately put out the fire, but at that moment, darkness fell, heavy as if someone had covered our eyes with a black cloth. In the darkness, rows of red eyes glowed, dozens, then hundreds of eyes watching us. Laughter and wind whistled from all directions, mixed with long wolf-like howls. But I knew they were not animals. My friend trembled and whispered that he heard calls, the familiar voices of his family and friends who had died. He ran into the darkness, despite my holding on. I only had time to see his arm being dragged into the dark forest, disappearing without a trace. Now I was alone, crouching in the middle of the clearing, surrounded by footsteps, laughter, and the ghostly flames hanging in the air. I knew I had to face these things head-on, or I would never escape. But I also knew that every step forward was a step closer to the abyss of madness. I trembled as I wrote the last entry for today in my diary, because I felt a cold hand on my shoulder from behind. Stay tuned for episode 6 of Haunted Room, Haunted. Hello everyone. Before we get started, make sure to like and subscribe, and leave a comment saying where you're from and when you watched. That way, YouTube will continue to show you stories like this. Now, let's get started. Asterisk, I collapsed. Beside the dying fire, the darkness of the forest gradually dissipated like a curtain being pulled down, and before my eyes appeared the familiar abandoned house. But this time it was different, darker, suffocatingly quiet. I realized I was in a strange room, no friends beside me, just me facing 4 cold walls. The walls were covered with old, blurry photos, but all of them were my faces at different ages, from childhood to adulthood. I had never taken those photos, but they existed right before my eyes, attached to each cracked wooden frame. I was too scared to look, but the eyes in the photos seemed to follow me every step. Then, from the corner of the room, the old bed creaked. The blanket covering the bed automatically bulged, as if someone was lying underneath. I trembled and stepped back, but the blanket slowly slid down, revealing a withered body, skin clinging to bones, eyes wide but empty. It turned its head to look at me, its mouth cracking with laughter. I screamed, but my voice did not make a sound. The air in the room was thick. The only candle flickered and then went out. In the darkness, a series of whispers rang out, as if dozens of people were standing right behind me. I did not dare to turn my head, but a pair of cold hands suddenly placed themselves on my shoulders, forcing me to sit down on the chair in the middle of the room. On the table was a diary, and it opened automatically. A long line of blood appeared. You have been here for a long time. This is your home. I tried to deny it, tried to stand up, but my whole body was tied tightly to the chair with invisible ropes. The room seemed to breathe. The walls cracked open, and from the cracks, red eyes appeared, watching me. A voice echoed, "Don't resist, you belong here." I closed my eyes, my heart pounding, and in the deep darkness, I found myself standing outside, looking into the very room where another version of me was sitting on a chair, smiling strangely. I screamed silently, trying to escape that image, but the only door in the room swung open. Behind the door was an endless hallway leading to a darker, colder place, deep underground. Stay tuned for episode 7 of True Stories. Hello, everyone. Before we get started, make sure to like and subscribe, and leave a comment saying where you're from and when you watched. That way, YouTube will continue to show you stories like this. Now, let's get started. Asterisk, I trudged down the long hallway behind the door, each step echoing loudly as if walking in an endless prison. The flickering light from the candle in my hand gradually faded, leaving behind darkness that swallowed everything. The cold air seemed to have hundreds of souls surrounding me, whispering close to my ear, sometimes calling my name in different voices. I wanted to turn around, but the door behind me had disappeared, leaving only the pitch-black hallway. I kept walking until I saw wooden doors lined up on both sides, each door engraved with the names of my lost friends. My heart clenched when I saw the names Kai Wang, my all clearly and coldly displayed, like a death list. I trembled, not daring to open any of the doors, but one of them suddenly swung open. Inside was an empty room, with only an old wooden chair, and on the chair was a diary identical to the one I was holding. I moved closer, opened it, and realized that the page recorded every moment I had just experienced in detail. Each line appeared before I could even think of it. I shuddered to realize that I was not writing this diary, but some force was writing for me, recording my predetermined fate. I tried to tear the page, but blood flowed from the edge of the paper, spreading across my hand. I threw the notebook down, and the whole room deformed. The four walls collapsed to reveal an empty space. My remaining friend suddenly appeared on the other side of the space. He raised his hand to call me. I tried to run to him, but the ground crumbled. Pieces of the floor fell into a deep pit. I only had time to see his terrified face before his entire body was pulled into the darkness, completely disappearing, leaving me alone. I screamed, but the sound was sucked into the void. Now I was the last one, and the hallway disappeared, replaced by a single door leading deeper. I understand that stepping through that door means coming face to face with the roots of the ritual. Stay tuned for episode 8 of Revenge Stories. Hello everyone. Before we get started, make sure to like and subscribe, and leave a comment saying where you're from and when you watched. That way, YouTube will continue to show you stories like this. Now, let's get started. Asterisk, I stood before the only remaining door, filled with fear but also knowing that there was no way back. When I touched the cold handle, a dark aura rushed into my body, making me suffocate. The door opened, revealing a large room covered in ash, and that ash seemed to be the remains of hundreds of burned-out candles. On the wall were streaks of dried blood that stretched into a scribbled line. All must pay. I trembled, realizing that this was the center of the ritual where the curse began. In that moment, the voices of my lost friends rang out simultaneously, blaming, resenting, screaming in my head. They said that I was the one who led them down this path, that I was the one who opened the book, that I was the one who called that monster. I screamed in denial, but it was useless, because from the darkness, familiar figures appeared. Kai, Mai, Wang, and even the friend who had just disappeared, all with deep black eyes and distorted faces. They approached me, heavy footsteps and cold breaths, mouths repeating, "You will pay." I retreated, but the door behind me disappeared, leaving me trapped in the midst of the vengeful spirits. I tried to run around the room, but each figure turned into dozens, hundreds, covering the whole place. Cold hands grabbed my shoulders, held my arms tightly, and dragged me to the floor. I panicked and begged for forgiveness, but the only response was a horrible, twisted laugh. Suddenly, in the middle of the room, a giant black book appeared, dozens of times thicker than before, wide open with blood-stained pages. The red words clearly appeared. "The curse of vengeance has been awakened." I felt my body being torn apart, my soul sucked into the pages. I screamed silently, trying to hold on to the last bit of consciousness to write in the diary. But at that moment, from deep within the darkness, another path suddenly opened, a faint light shining out as if inviting me. I understood that if I did not follow, I would be completely swallowed by the wrath of the vengeful spirits. Stay tuned for episode 9 of Bloodstained Diary, Scary. Hello everyone. Before we get started, make sure to like and subscribe, and leave a comment saying where you're from and when you watched. That way, YouTube will continue to show you stories like this. Now, let's get started. Asterisk, I stepped through the dimly lit passageway that opened from the darkness, hoping it would be a way out. But when the door closed behind me, all I saw was an empty room with a wooden table in the middle. On the table was my own diary, but the cover was stained with warm blood. I approached and opened it, trembling as each page turned by itself, spurting drops of bright red blood that splattered all over the table, soaking my hands. The scribbled lines appeared in my own handwriting, recording every moment I had lived, from childhood to this moment, but interspersed with passages I had never written, describing in detail the scene where I would die, where I would be torn apart, and the moment I would be swallowed into darkness. I tried to tear the diary, but the blood from the pages turned into hundreds of glowing red eyes that stared at me, making me suffocate. On the wall of the room, lines of blood were automatically carved. "You will never escape. You belong here." I heard a steady tapping on the floor, like hundreds of hands beating in unison, creating a terrifying melody. I trembled and looked up to see my face, another version of me sitting opposite, holding another diary, empty eyes and a cracked smile. It spoke in the same voice as me. "You wrote your own destiny." I screamed, rushing towards it, but my whole body passed through it as if through a thick smoke, and immediately I felt dozens of hands pulling me down to the bloody floor. Blood rose to my knees, then to my chest. The pungent smell rushed straight into my nose, making me want to suffocate. Whispers echoed everywhere, calling me by my real name, dragging me deeper. In desperation, I closed my eyes, hugging the diary tightly, hoping to retain the last bit of consciousness. Then suddenly, the room shook, the walls shattered, and a glowing red door appeared, radiating intense heat. I understood that behind it was the root of the ritual, the place where all the horrors originated. Stay tuned for episode 10 of The Survivor and the Shadow, Paranormal Stories. Hello, everyone. Before we get started, make sure to like and subscribe, and leave a comment saying where you're from and when you watched. That way, YouTube will continue to show you stories like this. Now, let's get started. Asterisk, I stepped through the red door, thinking I would be burned by the heat that came out, but instead, a cold void enveloped me. I stood in the middle of a vast dark space. Under my feet was not earth and stone, but a giant mirror reflecting myself. But the reflection was not synchronized. I raised my hand and it laughed. I turned my head and it stared. The familiar whispers echoed, the voices calling my name in the voices of dead friends, the voices of lost loved ones, all blended together to form a terrifying chord. I realized that I was no longer a mere survivor, but the only prey hunted by the darkness. Each of my footsteps echoed on the mirror, leaving long cracks, from which poured out thick black shadows that crawled like living creatures. They wrapped around my ankles, pulling me down, while the reflection below laughed gleefully. I struggled, screamed, but the darkness only tightened. Suddenly, a streak of light flashed in the distance. An old wooden door appeared in the middle of nowhere. I rushed towards it, trying to escape, but the shadows wouldn't let go. They whispered right in my ear that even if I got out of here, I would never escape them, that they would cling to me until my last breath. I was exhausted, but still tried to smash and open the door. The blinding light rushed in. I fell out, gasping for breath. I thought I had escaped, but when I opened my eyes, I found myself in the familiar bedroom where I used to live. Everything was as usual: the table, the chair, the window. But in the mirror hanging on the wall, my reflection didn't move in sync. It was still staring and smiling. I realized that the darkness had followed me back, creeping into this very house in every sleep and every breath. Watch episode 11 of The Last Warning, Haunted. Hello everyone. Before we get started, make sure to like and subscribe, and leave a comment saying where you're from and when you watched. That way, YouTube will continue to show you stories like this. Now, let's get started. Asterisk, I thought I was back in the familiar room, but the thick air made me know that this place was no longer the house I had lived in. The objects around me were identical, but all distorted, broken, like a distorted version of the real world. In the mirror, my reflection was still smiling, her eyes deep black. I stepped back, but in the darkness of the four walls, a series of hands reached out, grabbed my shoulders, and dragged me towards the mirror. I struggled, screamed, but to no avail. When my body was about to be swallowed, I suddenly woke up, realized that I was sitting on the table. In front of me was the bloody diary, and everything was just a dream. But my arm was still imprinted with purple bruises, blood still dripped from my fingers. I understood that I could not escape. Everything was just an endless loop. I wrote the last line in the diary: never try that ritual, because once you open the door, there will never be a way back. Footsteps echoed in the hallway, a familiar whisper calling my name in the dark. I knew that the darkness would haunt me forever, and sooner or later I would disappear like my friends. If anyone reads this diary, please burn it immediately before it is too late. This is my last warning, a person who has seen hell through a failed seance. And then, as I finished writing, I heard a slow knock on the door, 3 heavy knocks echoing in the dark room. I trembled, knowing that another story was beginning right behind that door. Stay tuned for the next story to find out what awaits.